If you fail to plan, you plan to fail, right? Now, that's not just a cliche. That is the golden rule of anything to do with cars, motorcycle, trucks, whatever you're going to build, right? You have to have a plan. And it's not just like, well, I'm going to buy this intake manifold and that carburetor and put these gears in it. No, it's more than that, right? There has to be you start with the concept of how the car is going to be used, the environment that it's going to be used in. Then you figure in your results. What do I want from this? What is this car supposed to do? And then you start planning the steps, the mechanical steps to get you there. So, based on the comments off of yesterday's video, there's a lot of interest in this, and there should be, because this is like ground zero for a bunch of you guys. You know, the fun daily driver that gets good gas mileage and all. And a few people said, well, you know, how are you going to do this, you know, without fuel injection? Or how are you going to do this without an overdrive transmission? And like 20 miles to the gallon out of a 360 never happened. No. It's all in the planning. So let's start with this. Let's start with our performance goal. We want the car to run a mid 14-second quarter-mile ET. Not lightning fast, but fast enough to be peppy fun, right? And representative of what the car would have run like new in the muscle car era. So what does it take to go 1450s in something like this? Well, at 3,600 pounds, it takes about 230 wheel horsepower to go like a mid 1450, which is approximately 290 to 300, let's call it 300 flywheel horsepower. So now we're starting off with an engine, and forget about factory ratings, we're starting off with an engine that was just basic tuning, just a curved distributor, an efficient carburetor and intake manifold, efficient exhaust. We'll make that horsepower like it's fallen out of a tree. But here's where you really have to it's a conceptual thing, right? We're obsessed with peak numbers. Everything is about peak numbers, especially in the last like 20 years or so, when everything became dyno this and dyno that, and you know, oh, it makes 500 horsepower, it makes 600 horsepower, it makes 900 fucking horsepower. Those are peak numbers. Your car does not live at peak numbers. You're not going to operate this thing at peak numbers. And normally aspirated, just about anything you do to increase the peak number detracts from the lower end numbers. The 2,000, 3,000 RPM performance that your typical daily driver is going to see. Anything that detracts from that power level down there hurts the car's efficiency. Once the efficiency is hurt, your gas mileage is hurt. And that's why there are so many 500 horsepower street cars out there that get 7 miles to the gallon and are lucky if they can squeak the tires and run a 14-second ET. Because yes, it'll make that power upstairs, but that's not where you're using it. And if you're gearing the car for street use, if you've got a tight converter in it, if you've got, you know, a highway-friendly gear set without going to an overdrive, if you've got a highway-friendly gear set, 270, 290 gears, no, that 500 horsepower motor is going to be strangled down low. It's going to be laboring. And every time you've got to pull away from a stoplight, you've got to go ahead, you've got to dig deep into the gas to get the car to move. So what we're doing with this now is we know 300 horsepower out of the basic engine is a slam dunk. It's a no-brainer. But making peak power or focusing on, instead of peak power, focusing on what it's going to make at drivable street highway RPM, that's where the efficiency comes from. So what we're looking is from, let's say, 1500 RPM, from idle 1500 RPM to around 3000 RPM, which is like what we're going to see highway cruising at 75 miles an hour or so. That's where we're going to focus our efficiency. And this is really the perfect starting point for that. The 360 is a long stroke motor, relatively long stroke motor. It wants to make bottom end power. It has the mechanical leverage. If you're doing this with a 350 Chevy or a 351 Ford, also great engines to start with. We're going to play around with camshaft timing, advancing the cam, but mostly what we're going to do is we're going to work with the cylinder heads in the name of not optimum flow, but just increasing bottom end, velocity. Velocity is important, it's very important. You start going with bigger valves and opening up the ports, of velocity hurts and your bottom end torque falls off. So we may actually go with a set of 318 heads on this instead of the 360 heads and port those to the right size. Or to the same dimensions as the 360 head. Because if we took a 360 head and we cleaned it up porting, we're increasing the volume of everything and therefore decreasing the velocity. Also, the small 318 intake valve will help keep that velocity high. And the relationship between the two, the 318 is a 3.91 inch bore and this is a 4-inch bore. The relationship between the two is only 90 thousandths of an inch bore difference. So the 318 valve, for our purposes, for this project, might be the ultimate way to go. We're going to be using as small a port dual plane intake manifold as we can get our hands on. You want the small port, again, for velocity. You want that mixture moving through quickly at low RPM. You want a dual plane because the dual plane has a longer runner. The longer runner tunes at a lower RPM. The carburetor we're going to be using for this is either going to be I haven't really decided yet. We're either going to go with a Q-Jet, which I've got a couple of them, and those are excellent street carburetors, or a thermoquad. As a Mopar guy, I lean towards the thermoquad, but for the purpose of the overall project, it may end up being a quadrijet. For the ignition system, now whatever carburetor we choose, we're going to be jetting it as lean as possible. And so for our ignition system, we're definitely going to use a hotter coil because we're going to have to open up those gaps to fire a lean mixture. So we're going to need at least 40,000 volts or so out of our ignition system, and we're going to need gaps in the 45 thousandths or so range. Again, everything to optimize that off-idle, the efficiency. Now the funny thing about this is that even though you're avoiding peak numbers, the car will actually feel snappier. It'll have a harder acceleration from, let's say, off-idle 1,500, 2,000 RPM to like 4,000 RPM, 5,000 RPM, about where you're going to hit like your on-ramp acceleration thing. That really is what people are looking for when you're talking about a fun daily driver. You're not looking for ETs, you're looking for a feeling. You're looking for the thing to lay you back in the seat and feel like a muscle car, sound like a muscle car. So that's our basic plan for the engine. And I'll dig into this filthy thing later on. I don't feel like getting dirty right now. Now the car itself, again, we want this thing to have the feel of a stock car. I don't want a lumpy cam. I don't want a tinny exhaust. I want this thing to sound and purr like something that just came off the assembly line. Daily driver, not a hot rod. So with that, we're definitely going to stick with the cast iron exhaust manifolds. These things will do the job. The car has a full 2¼ inch dual exhaust under it already, and we're going to keep that. We may add a balance tube to it, but we'll see what happens down the road. The transmission is a 904. The 360 was never mated to a 904. The 360 was always mated to 727s. Now, we would obviously pick up efficiency if we went with an overdrive transmission, or even better, we went with a manual transmission. But for the sake of simplicity, and I'm big on simplicity, we're going to keep the 904. And the 904 is definitely, in this case, the 904 is definitely a better choice than the 727 because it takes a lot less power to turn a 904. And at the power levels and the vehicle weight that we're talking about, the 904 is more than strong enough to do the job. And the same thing goes with the rear end. This car's got a 7¼ rear, which is the weak link of any, the stock Mopar drivetrain. The 7¼ is known to be junk. And I mean, to be honest with you, it is junk. But this one has a sure grip. And again, at the weight and the power levels that we're talking about, and this car will never see slicks. It'll never see a hard launch. It's never going to be in a circumstance where that rear end is stressed to the point that it's going to give up. Accelerating a car from 10 or 15 miles an hour to highway speed is an entirely different ballgame from accelerating one from a dead stop going for your 60-foot times. Those things don't figure into this equation. So we're going to work with that 7¼ I mean, I've used those used those rears for years in daily driver cars, and with more horsepower than we're going to make with that 360. And they hold up just fine. You just don't want to abuse it. And if you do have an open 7.25, and even like you got the Ford and the General Motors rears too, those tiny fuel economy rears, the sure grip goes a long way, because in all of those rears, almost universally, the spider gears are the weak link. So this one has a sure grip. It'll hit both wheels evenly, and it works really good. We won't have any problem with it. So it's all about efficiency. You need to plan the whole package. You need to lay out not only what you want the car. First, you start with what you want the car to achieve. Then you plug in the basic parameters of how it's going to operate. It's going to be primarily around town, primarily on the highway, or primarily on the drag strip. That's not what we're doing here. And then what parts do I need? What balance of parts do I need to accomplish that? But the most important thing you can take away from this is that peak numbers, we're brainwashed. Everybody, oh, it's got to make 500 horsepower, 900 horsepower, 1100 horsepower. Peak numbers do not count in the real world, right? They don't count in a project like this. Focus on what the engine is going to make at the RPM that it's going to be used at the most. I am confident, I know we'll get a 14-second ET out of this car. I know we'll get 20 plus miles per gallon out of this car. And now let's see how we assemble the nuts and bolts to make that happen. I'll see you tomorrow.